What's going on, everyone? GoodMicWork commentaries back at you with a little bit of a different video this week as I try my hand at being a real YouTuber and share with you my experience on the Chris Jericho Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea Part 2, the second wave, that took place from January 20th to the 24th from Miami to the Bahamas and back. And I have been talking about this trip for a long time as I booked it way back in June. So the anticipation was long and exciting, but finally, the day was almost here. So obviously, this was going to be a total nerd fest, so I wanted to be prepared. Went out and got myself some brand new wrestling t-shirts from ProWrestlingTees.com, and I was rocking some pretty awesome ones for this cruise. And it was really funny when I was packing up my suitcase, my poor cat Bub really didn't want me to leave. I also bought this nifty little vlogging setup for my phone. I anticipated recording a little bit more on-camera stuff, but I ultimately didn't really need it just due to the really bad and limited internet and very expensive internet on the cruise, so I figured it wasn't really worth it to film anything and try to upload it to YouTube. It was best that I just film as much footage as I possibly could and then save it and come up and do a review video when I got home. But a setup like this is still a really good low-budget way of filming stuff on location that I have a feeling will come in handy in the future. But needless to say, the stoke meter was at a level 10 as we headed to the airport to hop on board a cross-country flight all the way to Miami. And let me tell you, I live in the awesome city of San Diego, and it's always a treat flying out of here in the daylight because you get some amazing views of the city and the ocean and the downtown area and the Coronado Bridge and all that stuff. It's absolutely gorgeous. My God, what a place to live. We decided to fly into Miami the night before the ship sailed off to kind of regroup, adjust to the time change, eat some really good food, have a drink, relax, and get a good night's sleep in a hotel before taking the shuttle through the very cool city of Miami. This was actually my first time here in the city of Miami, and I thought it was really cool to see some of the downtown area. We drove by a lot of landmarks, including Marlins Park, and a lot of other stuff on the way to the port, where the Cruise of Jericho awaits. And at this point, we started to get really amped, especially upon completing the security check and getting in line to check in to the cruise. Now, this was quite the experience because everybody was in a super good mood. You had people decked out in their wrestling attire, their AEW attire, their Jericho attire, whatever you want to call it. As a matter of fact, on the first day, they wanted you to rep where you were from. So I wore a San Diego t-shirt, and a lot of people were wearing similar things, but the line was a very joyous type of atmosphere, and it really didn't take that long. Even though it looks like a shit ton of people here, it really was not that long of a wait. And like I said, everybody was in a really hyped mood. Eventually, it was our turn to get up to the window and provide the necessary paperwork and documentation to be granted access into the wonderful Cruise of Jericho, where we were officially ready to rock and roll. Everyone, upon entering the ship, was greeted with a high five right at the door by the awesome cruise director, and as a matter of fact, everyone associated with the Sixth Man Company was very cool and very helpful, and they were all just amazing. Our ship was called the Norwegian Pearl, which to me seemed enormous because I hadn't been on a cruise since I was about 14. But it's actually on the smaller side of what would be considered big ships or cruise ships. This is the boat that they use for all of the themed cruises. So not only do they have the Jericho one, but they have all sorts of different music and TV show themed cruises as well that the Sixth Man Group helps organize. So we were just one of many that they do. But they did a fantastic job organizing this whole event, and it was tons of fun. After receiving our high fives, we entered into the awesome atrium area, which was where customer service was located and had a place for live music and live podcasts. And there was a sports bar up top, which was open 24 hours, which was very, very handy. And speaking of restaurants and food, they gave you plenty of options on this cruise, but I've got to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed on the food end of things. One of the problems is that the main dining room that was in the very back of the ship that was just gorgeous was not available very often, or it was available at a limited time because they were using that large space for a lot of the meet and greets and a lot of the photo sessions. So it was really hard to kind of keep track of when it was open. So that really only left you with a pretty decent Asian place and a giant buffet. Now the buffet was great, but it was kind of hit or miss. Some days it looked really, really good, and some days it wasn't so good. But on the good days, it was pretty damn good, and we scored a really awesome breakfast on the last day with absolutely perfect weather. Right on the back of the ship that was wide open with ocean 360 degrees around you. The food was delicious, and it was the most pleasant part of the entire trip in terms of just the weather being picture perfect. We had absolutely intended to have one nice meal at one of the bougie restaurants, the ones that you could pay extra for, which was totally fine, and we were really into it. However, with the flurry of activities that you had to do, and the massive scheduling conflicts and the massive amounts of money we were already dropping on alcohol and internet and everything else, we just felt like it wasn't necessary. The first thing we did upon boarding the actual ship was locate our room, just to check it out. Now, our luggage was checked when we entered the ship and would be delivered later on, so we only had what was on us. Now, this was a porthole cabin, which was about the second cheapest room you could get for 2 people. It gets cheaper the more people you have, so going with a group of friends is definitely the way to go if you're trying to make this thing as affordable as possible. That would be my advice, try to get a group. In the room itself, we were greeted with all kinds of cool stuff and souvenirs, including 2 bottles of Jericho Cruise bubbly, both of which we brought home and sit nicely right next to my other bottle of bubbly that I had ordered when Jericho won the title. We also had a very nice detailed schedule laying out all of the activities every single day, which was insanely overwhelming, and some things you were forced to choose between. Not everybody could do everything. You couldn't meet everybody. You couldn't see every show and every podcast because some of them were going on simultaneously. So it was a bit overwhelming, but we were still determined to make this thing a relaxing vacation. Once we scoped out our room, we grabbed a beer and started wandering around the ship. One of the first things we did was head to the back of the ship where the sports court was located. We immediately saw the Young Bucks shooting hoops with some fans, and it became apparent that the wrestlers were going to be everywhere on this ship. We eventually made our way to the pool deck, which is where there was always action happening. It was located in the front of the ship on the same side as our room, so it was really convenient for that, although we were way below on 4th deck, and this was way up on 13. Lots of cool things were happening out here as people were boarding the ship and starting to get acclimated and have some drinks. Lots of wrestlers were walking by. The wrestlers did not really stay to themselves. They were out mingling with everybody else, eating food, hanging out by the pool or on the lounge chairs, or just walking around in general. There was even a fun replica 24/7 title being defended on the lower deck with many title changes. Everybody got a crack at winning the title, including 3 or 4 dudes in a wheelchair. So it was really fun, and like I said, just an overall chill vibe where people were just ready to have a good time. After a couple of hours had passed and everybody was aboard the ship, we were welcomed aboard on the pool deck and treated to some really awesome live music, and at one point, they were giving out shots to everybody. The servers, the waiters, were walking around with trays of hundreds and hundreds of shots to pass out to everybody on board. And that was pretty awesome, and we were all going to do a toast together. So after the honorary toast, we downed our shots, and that's when we were treated to Fozzy, kicking things off as we sailed off into the Atlantic, along with some of the most absolutely amazing views of Miami. The weather was absolutely gorgeous. It was perfect outside, nice and warm, and as someone who, like I said, resides in a beautiful city like San Diego, it takes a lot to impress me, and although Miami is no San Diego, it is still a very beautiful city, at least what I saw of it, and I got a lot of great shots from the boat as it sailed away, and at one point it even looked like the houses were moving. It kind of fucked with your sense of equilibrium or sense of direction or whatever, but it was messing with my mind a little bit and creating an illusion. Very, very cool, and one of my favorite parts of the entire cruise was when we sailed off into the ocean. Absolutely amazing experience. After all of the music settled and we were out into the Atlantic, we kicked off the first night with some awesome wrestling, including Jon Moxley, who was out right away. running off and beating the shit out of Sammy Guevara, who incidentally was one of the nicest people on this entire cruise. Super cool dude. Ran into him in the elevator area, which is where we saw a lot of the talent and the wrestlers. They were all mingling around there. People were getting pretty crunk right off the bat, and some sat in the hot tub for hours, which was just frightening because these weren't the most hygienic looking people, let's just put it that way. There was people dancing and there was people jumping in the pool. As a matter of fact, people watching was a highlight of this trip for me. And let me clear something up as well about these sausage fest comments that I was seeing all week online. It seems like a lot of people were poking fun at the Jericho Cruise for being all dudes, and that might be partly my fault because I did post a video that got a shit ton of views, and there weren't a ton of women in there, but for some reason, this was being used as some sort of ammunition for people who wanted to criticize the cruise. Here's a good rule of thumb about life. People tend to downplay what they're not a part of, especially on the internet. So I wasn't surprised to hear people who weren't going on the cruise to say things like, oh, it doesn't look fun, not enough chicks, or whatever. Let me tell you, and clear up any rumors, this cruise had no shortage of women. Actually, it felt like a lot more than I expected. Lots of couples, too. Have any of you ever been to a WrestleMania, a pay-per-view, a Raw, a SmackDown, an NXT event, a house show? Picture that, but on a boat. That's all this was. This was a wrestling show on a boat with the same wrestling crowd that you would see pretty much everywhere. Is it going to be dude heavy? Of course. Every wrestling show is. But I've never heard anyone worry about how many women are at WrestleMania or how many women are at a wrestling convention. So to me, this was a non-factor, and the critique is, to be honest, stupid. And according to Chris Jericho, who tweeted out this just a couple of days ago, there were 846 paid female guests out of 2,100, which I believe is somewhere around 40%. I had the estimated female attendance at about 30% just based on my eyesight, but apparently it was even more than that. But I promise you this, there isn't a human being that attended that cruise that said, you know what, I'm not going to go next year because there weren't enough women. No one was saying that, and the only people that seemed to bother are the people that didn't go. We attended our first podcast on night one, which was a Talk of Jericho episode on the NWO. Now, originally, Kevin Nash and X-Pac were scheduled for the cruise, but they had to back out at the last minute. So that only left Eric Bischoff as a true NWO member available to talk about this on the panel. So to replace Kevin Nash and X-Pac, they brought out Booker T and DDP. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, those guys weren't in the WCW version of the NWO. What would they have to offer? They had a lot to offer because you got to remember, they were there. They were in the locker room. They actually had a really cool perspective and shared a lot of great stories about the NWO from an outsider looking in. Two of a very select group of WCW wrestlers to never jump to the NWO, and that group got huge. I mean, even Sting, who was the face of WCW, jumped to the NWO. So to hear the stories from their perspective, from everyone else in the locker room, the way they were perceiving the NWO during those times was really interesting, and a lot more interesting than you would think. This might have been my favorite podcast of the entire week, was right off the bat here on night one. And damn it, let me shout out Chris Jericho and his awesome suit. Comes out there wearing a red and white suit with Canadian flags all over it and bright fucking red shoes, and he just got done playing a set with Fozzy. This guy was fucking amazing. Now, due to the fact that I'm old, that was enough to wipe me out for one day. Now, the party would continue just about every night into the wee hours of the morning, but due to so many activities being planned, we tried our best to get some decent rest. So after that podcast, we headed back to the room to get some sleep because we would be landing in the Bahamas first thing in the morning, and if we wanted to get off the ship and explore, we needed to get up and do that. So we didn't have any excursions planned. If this would have been a non-wrestling cruise, we likely would have done some of that, but we chose not to. Instead, we just wandered the streets a little bit like total tourists, and we found a nice place on a small dock for a drink while we looked out on the beach and at the giant ships that were sitting there in port. You can barely see our ship tucked around the back there. But it was really nice to kind of get on solid ground and just look around and put our feet up and have a nice island cocktail. It was a very nice, warm, pleasant day. Everything about this experience was totally pleasant. Walking back to the ship was a little tough, though, because the locals are very aggressive and they want tips or whatever, but if you walk past, you get through it, and you're right back on the boat. And speaking of my better half, big shout out to my beautiful girlfriend, Elizabeth, who was an absolute joy to have along on this trip with me. She, too, is a wrestling fan, although not to the psychotic degree that the rest of us are. She watches wrestling through a set of much more pure eyes, void of all of the anger and the cynicism and the entitlement that you see out there amongst the majority of the fans these days, it seems like. Here's a perfect example, too, of how awesome she is. At one point, during one of the wrestling matches, Jungle Boy took a giant selfie stick away from a crew member and started playing with it, at which time Elizabeth yells out, oh my God, fucking adorable. And get this, she was also very much into the costume competition, something that I didn't partake in at all. And she went out and got herself a full-on Bret the Hitman Hart costume, complete with real wrestling boots and wrestling tights, leather jacket, and a Winged Eagle replica belt. Absolutely amazing. I love you, babe. Lots of people were dressed up too, because that was kind of the theme. They wanted a lot of the fans to dress up as wrestlers, and we saw some amazing costumes. Probably some of my favorites was Kane. This guy was walking around having a good time talking to fans, and his costume was out of this world. We also saw an amazing Kamala, and we saw a Hart Foundation tag team. Now, these folks were from Canada. We spent a few minutes talking to them, and the dude who was playing Jim Neidhart had that goatee down perfectly. My God, they were a lot of fun. I also met a Mrs. Perfect while in line waiting for my Booker T photo. She was complete with orange singlet, Intercontinental title, and the towel, and the whistle that the coach used to carry. So basically she was like 1991 Mr. Perfect as Intercontinental Champion, except she was Miss Perfect. There were lots of Ric Flairs. I saw Papa Shango, IRS, Akeem, the African Dream, and probably the best of all was Orange Cassidy. That's right, there he is, the man himself, Orange Cassidy. Oh, wait a minute, that's not Orange Cassidy, that's fucking Sella Monster. Man, I'll tell you what, after all these years, it was really cool to finally get a chance to meet him. I think it was one of my listeners that informed me that he was going on this cruise, found out a few months ago and hit him up, and we got together for a drink and hung out and chatted for a while. And I had actually intended on getting some footage to use of just he and I talking and me pretending to say something funny and him pretending to laugh, just so I could show that to you guys, but I never got a chance to pull out the camera and record anything, so a picture is all you're going to be able to get here. But what was funny about this is how many fans thought that Jason was actually Orange Cassidy, because Orange Cassidy was not booked for the cruise. So Jason puts on that denim outfit. He's walking around there fooling every fucker on that boat. As a matter of fact, at one of the lines I was waiting in for a meet and greet, somebody was bragging behind me about meeting Orange Cassidy, and I was laughing my ass off. And finally I heard someone say, I don't know if that was him, and I turned around and informed them that it wasn't him. However, who it was did not have a very small following in his own right, and they should check out his podcast. So anyway, Jason, it was fantastic to meet you finally and kind of shoot the shit a little bit. And I think the fans marked out for it on Twitter as well when we posted that pic. Speaking of awesome people that I met on the cruise, I also want to shout out Devlin. Now, Devlin is a Patreon supporter and fan of the channel, and let me tell you, this kid was no joke. He is in the military, currently stationed in Hawaii, but also spent time in England, where he attended a lot of UK wrestling shows. He's only 22 years old, and probably one of the few people on the boat to do everything. This kid had so much energy, and I was jealous of it. And he wouldn't stop either. As soon as he got off the cruise, he headed right to Houston for Worlds Collide. So, Devlin, it was very nice to meet you, young man. Keep living the life, and thank you so much for your service. Later on night 2, after the Bahamas, and everyone was back on the boat, they had the Dynamite taping. Now, this went about 3 hours. It was edited down to 2 hours, and I have to admit, we didn't have great seats. Well, there weren't really seats, but we really didn't have a great spot to watch this. We kind of hung around near the bar over by one of the hot tubs, which gave us a great corner angle and a corner view of the ring, but we still got a little antsy and walked around a bit, and they didn't want us taking any pictures or videos, so they were kind of watching for you. So this was the only footage I was able to get, and they told everybody to put their phones away because I'm assuming they wanted to try their best to control the spoilers. Or, another thought I had is that we were actually docked at port for this. They flew in, I think, Shivani and Jim Ross and maybe Excalibur too to do the commentary in the Bahamas. So the camera was only on one side of the ship, so maybe they didn't want the fans to know that we were docked and they wanted to play it off like they were at sea. I don't know why we couldn't have our cameras out, but it didn't matter. Spoilers were out right away. As a matter of fact, Sean Ross Sapp hit me up to ask me about the tag team title change and stuff, so I knew that it was literally seconds after it happened that spoilers were on the internet, whether we could use our phones or not. So not sure what the story was with that. But I liked the way the whole thing looked. I even tweeted out that it was going to look fantastic on TV. And when I got home and checked out the Dynamite show that I had recorded, it did look really good. I think the only bad part was the wind, but it was kind of part of the experience. I also thought it was kind of cool that I was in attendance for AEW's first ever title change, because nobody's dropped the belts yet. Jericho, Riho, and SCU were all crowned champions, but nobody's lost the belts yet. So for me to say I was in the audience for that might be pretty cool if this company is still around in 30 years. After the Dynamite tapings, we attended another Talk is Jericho, this time with Jake the Snake Roberts. And I got to shout out Chris Jericho right off the bat here, who was just an absolute workaholic. The dude wrestled 2 to 3 times. He did several Fozzy sets. He did 4, count 'em, Talk is Jericho podcasts. He met all 2,100 fans that attended the cruise. He did autograph signings, additional meet and greets, a VIP lunch, and still had time to mingle around in the lobby and shit. I actually sat near his dad and brother-in-law during this podcast. His brother-in-law is from nearby Oceanside, and we chatted as we exited the building. Even took a picture with Ted Irvin after the show. A very cool guy and just very talkative. Just was really cool and was more than happy to chat it up a little bit. I got to say this about the podcast, too. One of the more surprising things to come out of the Jake the Snake Roberts podcast with Jericho is that he actually confirmed the story of Andre the Giant not agreeing to the finish at WrestleMania 3 and stringing everyone along. Now, Hogan has always mentioned this in interviews, saying that Andre made Hogan sweat it out and Hogan did not know the finish. He entered the ring with Andre without knowing the finish to the match, and I had always called bullshit on that because I thought there was just no way. There are too many people in attendance, including myself. There is too much money on the line. That is a humongous payday and amount of business that you just don't fuck with for the fun of it. And I always thought that Hogan was just being over dramatic. When you don't really need to be, that moment speaks for itself. I thought Hogan was being typical Hogan and lying his ass off. However, Jake Roberts, when telling Andre stories, basically confirmed this. And Jericho even was like, wow. He goes, Hogan always says that Andre didn't agree to the finish until they got in the ring. And Jake's like, no, that was the deal, because every time Vince tried to approach Andre at WrestleMania 3, he shooed him away because he was always playing cards or playing cribbage or whatever with the boys. And every time Vince came in to talk to him, he just shoot him away. All the while fully intending to put Hogan over. He never once was not going to do that, but he wanted to fuck with everyone as a rib. So I thought Hogan was lying. Jake kind of corroborated the story here, so maybe that urban legend is true. I always thought there was just no way. So that was really interesting. And Jake also would have a comedy show, I think the next night or maybe the night after. I can't remember when we attended that. But we were interested in that, and we wanted to see his form of comedy. He was opened by Bruce Jingles, who I never heard of before, and his comedy was not really my cup of tea. But he was a super cool guy, and again, very approachable, and he seemed to really be enjoying himself. Jake's show wasn't nearly as good as the podcast, in my opinion. There was also some pretty gnarly stories that I didn't appreciate. One story of Mr. Fuji killing his neighbor's dog and feeding it to them. along with the frozen dead snake in the trunk of the car, which I've heard about before, that again I was hoping was a lie and I was hoping was an embellishment, but Jake pretty much confirms that he got fucked up, left the snake in the trunk of the car, and it froze to death. So you combine that with the dog stew that Fuji fed to his neighbors, and I don't know how much I enjoyed Jake's form of comedy. I really hope he was kidding about the dog stuff. We were also able to catch a little bit of Booker T's Hall of Fame Q&A, where he answered questions from the audience. I sat up top and just kind of observed from up there. He also touched on why he was able to do this cruise, and he wasn't even asked that question. He offered this information. And he said, I know I'm kind of a WWE guy, and a lot of you are wondering what I'm doing here and how I'm able to be here. And he basically just said, because he's a grown-ass man, and he does whatever the fuck he wants. And that was good enough for me. I tweeted out that as well, and apparently Ringside News picked up on that and used it in one of their stories. But I wasn't saying anything that wasn't true, and I certainly wasn't misquoting Booker, but I hope I didn't get him in any trouble for that. The whole thing was filmed by Sharmell, his wife, and even Chavo Guerrero stopped by at one point to say a few nice words on the mic about Booker T. And like I said, this whole cruise was just a love fest. Nothing but respect from everybody, and everybody was just cool. We also caught a small amount of the Conrad-less 83 Weeks podcast with Eric Bischoff. Now, Conrad Thompson also had to back out of the cruise, I think, last minute. I think he had an emergency or something like that. But Bischoff kind of did it on his own. Got a chance to meet Eric Bischoff as well. He was actually at the bar all by himself. The entire bar was empty. He was sitting right in the middle of it, knocking back some Coors Lights when I came up to order a drink. Now, he was on his phone, so I didn't want to bother him, but as I was signing my tab, I joked with the bartender. I said, "Put this on Mr. Bischoff's tab." And he kind of turned over to me and laughed, shook my hand, and we chatted for about 2 or 3 minutes. And it was very cool to talk to Eric Bischoff for the first time, because I just, I think he's a very interesting person, and, he was a big part of wrestling history, and just to chat with him for a few minutes was very cool. He was very nice. Thank you, Eric, for being awesome. The final 2 days is where we had most of our meet and greets. It was impossible, like I said, to meet everyone, so we were all assigned designated times to attend photo sessions. In most of those cases, you had to choose who you wanted. So Jericho was the only guy who met everyone. He was the only piece of talent there that met every passenger on board. They took the photo there instead of using your phone, and you have to access these photos in a couple of weeks on their website. So I do not have the picture of Jericho and myself yet because it's not ready yet, but all of the other meet and greets, you just handed your phone to the person in charge and they took the picture for you. So my meetups, the ones that I chose to meet Booker T, who was very cool and again seemed like he was having just a great time. Also got a chance to meet Jurassic Express, and Marco Stunt really marked out for my shirt, which was cool. Also got a chance to meet Cody Rhodes and was able to prolong the conversation a little bit by name-dropping someone that we have in common. And also got a chance to meet Scott Hall, and I think Cody Rhodes and Scott Hall were my two favorite meet and greets of the entire cruise, because got a chance to chat with him a little bit and see him for the first time since like the mid-90s, and also very thankful that we get to have Scott Hall here. Thanks to DDP, we've got Scott Hall and Jake the Snake Roberts on this cruise with us, and we got a chance to meet them, so very cool. And like I said, even the waiting in line had its share of entertainment. We had servers there passing out hors d'oeuvres, and waiters would bring you drinks. It was fun to watch all of the other meet and greets as well. MJF was amazing, taking most of his pictures sitting down on his cell phone, at one point walking away from a lady. I think he threw a title belt in the trash can, all sorts of stuff. There was even one story floating around where he called someone in a wheelchair Hot Wheels, and that person then proceeded to stand up. I heard that story being floated around the ship a couple of times, but don't know the details on that. I think Sella Monster can probably fill you in on that one, because he was telling me the story as well. I just don't remember the specific details of it, but MJF was a huge hit, and this dude was non-stop kayfabe. He never stopped. Never ever stopped being MJF, and will be interesting to see if he too can keep this up for a 20-year career. On the final day, we saw some DDP Yoga going on the pool deck. A lot of people participating in that. Like I said, it was a beautiful day, so people were getting their workout on. And there was also the final Talk is Jericho podcast with the Guerrero family, Vicky Guerrero, Chavo Guerrero, and Eddie Guerrero's daughter. So they were there to talk about the life and times of Eddie. We didn't really stay long for this one, only a few minutes, but was still cool to kind of see all of them out in the sun, talking about the memories of Eddie Guerrero. Very cool. We capped off the trip with a super fun night of wrestling that included some great matches, including Jon Moxley taking on Christopher Daniels. I don't know if those guys have had any run-ins prior to Moxley's WWE run, but it was really cool to see those guys hook it up on the boat. And we had a pretty good spot for this final night of wrestling, and I was able to get a lot of good footage of Christopher Daniels and Jon Moxley coming down to the ring, along with MJF and Jurassic Express. We had Joey Janela and Cody Rhodes in the main event and the final match of the entire cruise. And of course, Cody got the victory there. And after the match, we had a very nice and heartfelt farewell speech by Cody, where he talked about the importance of being a wrestling fan. He even told us all to turn to our left and right and say hello to the fan next to us and shake their hand, and really preached positivity, which is something that I think wrestling fans desperately need. And he also talked about the strides that AEW has made in the short amount of time, and getting guys like Moxley and Chris Jericho on board. And he also brought out a lot of the baby faces. We had Jon Moxley coming out, Jurassic Express, SCU, and even Tony Khan coming to the ring. They all tossed out souvenir turnbuckles, and when those were gone, they ripped off the turnbuckles from the ring and tossed those out as well. It was a really cool experience, and everyone was just super polite and having a good time, and there was not much aggression. It was pretty much exactly what I was hoping it would be. And that was basically a wrap, on the trip. Once we had that final night of wrestling, you had two choices. Go to sleep because the ship was docking and they wanted everybody off the boat by like 8 o'clock in the morning, or you could party one final night and go to 2 a.m. and wake up like a hungover mess the next morning. But we opted to put a final stamp on this vacation and call it a night and retreat to the cabin for some decent rest before a very long day of travel home. And as much as we did on the cruise, there were still a lot of things we missed. Like I said, there was parties going until 2 a.m. every night, way up in the big lounge where they did a lot of the meet and greets and the photo sessions. They were doing karaoke, which pretty much went on all night. Lots of people partook in that. There's a really great video going around that was shot by Sella Monsters. He actually gave me permission to use 5 or 10 seconds of this footage in this video of Jon Moxley singing karaoke, singing Bohemian Rhapsody. He just had the time in his life, and the motherfucker was rocking the eye patch for the entire cruise. So awesome. And Jason, I appreciate you allowing me to use a couple of seconds of that clip. Go check out the Sella Monsters recap of the cruise as well. That should be up on his YouTube channel at any time. We also did not see the Ric Flair podcast with Chris Jericho. I actually never even laid eyes on Ric Flair. Never saw him. He was charging for a meet and greet, but I just couldn't do it. I would really like to get a picture with Flair, but I always feel like he's hard up for money and I just don't want to participate, so I was not able to see Flair's podcast with Jericho. They also gave you a chance to go to the auditorium where all the podcasts were and take a picture inside the AEW ring, which I also did not get a chance to do. I know we missed at least one Fozzy set. We did not see Gabriel Iglesias, who I think is a comedian. I'm not really familiar with him, but he was on the boat as well. And we didn't, like I said, do an excursion in the Bahamas. Just for us, our focus was wrestling and not really doing anything else. And we also really wanted to balance all of the activities with being an actual vacation. My life is very hectic. I work a full-time job and I do YouTube, and I would like to relax a little bit along with enjoy some meet and greets and some partying and things like that. So unfortunately, I did not have the energy of my 22-year-old friend Devlin, but I was still able to cram in a lot of stuff while enjoying a nice, relaxing vacation at the same time. And in the end, I was very well rested because it was a very long travel day home. but we brought back lots of memories with us and even watched Peanut Butter Falcon on the plane coming home, which featured cameos by Jake the Snake Roberts and Mick Foley. So that was kind of fitting that that's the last thing I saw to cap off this great fucking vacation. My only regret from the cruise is I didn't get my classic WCW television replica title belt signed. I was really hoping to have Chris Jericho sign it, but it wasn't something you could ask him to do during the photo session, so the only way to really get it done is to run into him on the ship, which means I'm going to have to carry this damn thing around with me everywhere, and that's really not my style. So I just elected not to worry about it, and I didn't get the belt signed. So that's my really only regret, but not a big deal. I can easily get over that. My final thoughts on the Jericho Cruise: would I do it again? Abso-fucking-lutely. Will I do it again? Probably not. Only because I vacation in Hawaii every other Easter, and next year is my year to go. And also, I'm expecting WrestleMania to be near my neck of the woods on the West Coast, either Los Angeles or Vegas. That's kind of what I'm thinking is going to happen, although it's not confirmed. That's what I'm thinking is going to happen for WrestleMania 37. So what that means is I'm going to be going to all of the WrestleMania festivities, followed by a week-long vacation in Hawaii back-to-back, and it would be really tough to pull off the Jericho Cruise in 2021 along with those other two trips. The only way it would be possible is if Jericho wants to book me for the cruise for free. Are you listening, Jericho? You want to hook me up? Give Elizabeth and I a free ride on next year's cruise, and I will be there. We had such a good time, and we absolutely loved doing this. But unfortunately, 2021 will probably be out for the Jericho Cruise, but you never know for 2024. Hopefully, I will be at the 4th Jericho Cruise because, like I said, it was a blast. So anyways, that's a wrap on my Jericho Cruise experience. Let me know what you thought of this video, and if you liked it, I will try to do this for every wrestling-related trip that I go on. And like I said, I think it's very likely that WrestleMania 37 will be over here on my side of the country. So thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.